Hey everybody, this is Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. Today we're talking about mental health, specifically depression, in members of the LGBTQIA+ community. There is a mental health crisis within the community itself. Today we're going to be focusing largely on depression and how that becomes an issue and what are some of the external factors that get us to this place. If you want to hear a video more focused on specific mental health concerns, go ahead and drop a comment below and we will get on that. First, a couple of statistics that I want to share with you to make sure we're all sort of understanding this whole thing the same way. Small caveat, all of these numbers are in people who have reported that they identify this way, not everybody, because there's not really a way to do that. 61% of those who identify within the LGBTQIA+ community have depression. 45% of this population has PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. 36% of people in this community suffer from anxiety. If you identify within the LGBTQIA+ community, specifically as a teenager, but really across the board, you have a roughly 1.6% higher chance of attempting to take your life. For those who have lived in specifically the US, specifically in the last couple of decades, none of these are really surprising numbers, but I really want us to be clear about the reality of what we're dealing with. It feels, especially if you've been aware of your identity for a longer amount of time, it feels like things have changed and become more affirming and become more accepting. And by and large, they have. But it was not that long ago that that was not the case. It wasn't until 1990 that the World Health Organization actually removed homosexuality from their list of mental disorders. 1990. Y'all, it is 2021. That was not that long ago. That's significant because many people in the community don't seek treatment for the mental health complications that they have. 10% of people who self-reported and said they don't seek treatment all said that they don't seek treatment because in the past they have experienced either inappropriate questions or outright discrimination against them by those in the healthcare industry. According to the U.S. Transgender Survey, that number just escalates for people who are transgender. 23% of people who are transgender do not seek medical attention or emotional or behavioral assistance because they have been mistreated at some point by someone within that industry and don't trust that they'll be safe in those circumstances. In 2019, the SAMHSA report estimated 6.8 million people who identify as LGBTQIA+ have suffered from any type of a mental illness. 45.7% of those people never sought treatment because of fear of discrimination. If you think that we live in a place where this is not a thing anymore, you either are extraordinarily lucky or you're not watching what's happening. All you have to do, especially as a queer teen, is watch a movie, watch a TV show, get on TikTok, and the majority of people are still portrayed as cisgender and straight. The majority of people out there, the couples that you see, even the individuals that you see, if they do identify as queer, they have multiple problems. They're very much tertiary characters in the shows and movies that are out there. When you can't look around and see people that look like you or people that behave like you or people that engage in relationships the way that you do, it enhances this idea in your head that what you are is not normal. When people feel like what they are is not normal, they stuff it down and do everything they can to act like everyone else wants them to, which is why people wait until so much later sometimes to come out to anyone because they're not even able to come out to themselves. They're not able to accept the idea that this is who they are and it can be okay and they can live a very productive and happy life. It becomes part of their story to ignore who they are. And so even at some point when you are out and comfortable and with a partner that you care about, sometimes you're still looking around to see who's around before you can be affectionate. I had a conversation recently with other clinicians and we talked specifically about teens within this community. In your teen years, you are looking to other people to reflect back to you who you are. So it's friends or family members or media. It's not overt usually when you first become aware of the idea that maybe you're not straight or cisgender. And it becomes this thing that you keep inside because you're kind of afraid to tell anybody because you know it's not normal and you don't want people to look at you like you're weird. And so you don't tell people, stuff it down and you move on. And you don't see other people being out and being happy. When we are looking at others to see who we are, that's a developmentally appropriate thing to do. But it's difficult when no one is willing to hold that mirror up for you, when no one's willing to reflect back to you who you are and make it acceptable. Add that to the fact that there are so many families that when their children, teen to adult children, come out to them, they remove that person from their lives. How many times do you think someone needs to hear a story about someone losing their family when they came out to them? How many times do you think they have to hear that before they wonder, is that going to happen to me? Because I'll tell you, one time. That's it. You just have to hear that one time. Straight kids don't have to come out to their parents. Straight kids don't have to sit down and say, Mom and Dad, I'm probably going to get married and have a completely socially acceptable wedding and future and give you grandchildren. But queer kids have to not only out themselves to their parents, but also wait to see if their parents are going to find that acceptable. If you get on multiple mental health websites, especially those who are queer friendly and queer informed, they have all these resources for parents and everything, which is a huge step. Don't get me wrong. I love it. Most of these resources are very good, peer reviewed, fantastic options. But here's the problem. Why do we need these resources? Why is it an option for parents to not accept this about their children? The reason that is the way that it is, the reason that we're still okay with that is because society as a whole, while they have made strides to include people, still hold a marginalized view of those in the queer community, and that makes it okay to discriminate against them. But you only have so long to be discriminated against before you turn it inside. You turn it into you, and the messages you get of shame and guilt because of who you are and what you want out of life are not yours to hold, and they were never society's to give you. There is nothing wrong with identifying within the LGBTQIA plus community. And anybody who says there is really needs to investigate where that comes from. A lot of this comes from the church world. I've got a number of videos talking about religious trauma, and I don't want this to turn into another one of them, but I want to be realistic about this. When so much of the teaching is centered on guilt and should and molding someone into someone else's image of the perfect whatever, if you don't hit that mark, you don't feel like you're worth anything because you're never taught how to figure out your own inherent worth and how to accept your own inherent worth. And so when this community called Christianity, specifically evangelical Christianity, has so much power politically and so much say in what gets put on TV and what books get published and what curriculum gets chosen for schools, when one agenda has all of that power, we have created a mental health crisis for people who are valid just because they are people. But then we have people who are scared of them and assume, that they're not valid. There's a lot of history behind how the evangelical Christian movement became enmeshed in the battle against homosexuality. Not shockingly, it starts in Florida with the Orange Queen, I think is what her actual title was. Maybe at some point I'll do a video on that. There's tons of podcasts about it. The bottom line is the evangelical movement felt like they were losing the control that they had over America's families. And as we've seen, the best way to get people behind your twisted agenda is to tell them who's to blame for their problems, right? So they handed people who to blame for their problems. Blame the gays because they're the ones that are tearing apart the fabric of your community, and they're the ones tearing apart marriages. They're going to indoctrinate your children. Ironic that the evangelical church was talking about indoctrinating children. They're going to molest your children. That's my favorite. Somehow it became very acceptable to make synonymous people who are gay with people who molest children. Not the same thing. That idea says more about the person who is promoting that concept than it does about the person they're talking about, but it still ends up the fault of the person they're talking about. It sounds really negative and it sounds a little scary about where we're at, but I think we just need to start being real about the messages that we're giving people and why we think those messages are appropriate. When someone puts a judgment on somebody and it gets a little bit widespread, the person who ends up fearing is the one who's the victim of it. You turn inside and you withdraw from polite society or from people as a whole because they can't be trusted to keep you safe physically, first of all, but second, mentally. So here are some ways that we can actually start to work to fix that. Everyone deserves a safe space and everyone deserves safe people. Unfortunately, that is not a reality for most people who identify within this community. If you are an ally, become a safe person for someone. You know what? Even if you're a member of the community, become a safe person for someone else. Become a person that somebody can come to you and talk to you without judgment, without fear of being outed, without fear of recrimination. Be somebody that anybody can come and talk to. Stand in that space with them. Hold that space for them without inserting yourself. Because when you insert yourself, you're doing it for you. Just a quick reminder. Therapy is a great idea for people who are struggling specifically with depression and anxiety within this community. But like I said earlier, the fear of not having it be understood or having it looked at wrong or questions that are inappropriate, those fears stop people from doing that. So we've got some counseling students that watch these videos. Consider specializing in work with this community, making trainings and helping people get educated about how people really act and what they're really afraid of and what we can do about it. trevorproject.org has a couple of different options for support for people if they are looking for a safe place to be. First of all, their phone number, 866-488-7386. Give it a call. It is a toll-free number where you can call and you can talk to people should you be in a crisis type situation. Are you afraid to talk? You can also text the word START to 678-678 and you can text with a support person. Have you ever heard of Trevor Space? It is a networking site that the Trevor Project has started specifically for those who identify in the queer community under the age of 25. The more people that understand what is actually happening and the actual battle that is going on to remove rights from people just because you don't understand them or think maybe it's weird that they feel the way they feel. The more people who are able to gather together and support one another, the faster we will get to a point where we're no longer looking at headlines about states that make rules that prohibit transgender students from participating in sports. The sooner we get to a place where we don't need to look at these numbers, these huge numbers of people who are suffering from depression and anxiety just because they want to be who they are and happen to live in a time when that's still questionable for some reason. When we support one another, when we do our best by one another, whether you understand it or not, really is not the issue. That's your issue. The issue, bigger issue, and the way that we care for one another is I might not understand what you're going through. I might not identify like you do. I might not have the same experiences, but I recognize loss. I recognize loneliness. I recognize the frustration and the fear that we have in our society today, and I will no longer allow you to go through it alone. And if you carry nothing else from this video, that's what I want you to get. I want you to understand that creating these spaces and creating these relationships makes people healthier. It gets people to a point where they can see themselves as valid, and everyone deserves to see themselves as valid. And when people see themselves as valid, they will start to speak up in a way that means that the larger part of society cannot continue to ignore the harm that is being done to people in this community. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Next week, I'm going to be answering questions and assumptions about bisexuality because that's always fun. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, go ahead and hit the bell so that you get notifications for when I publish, and I will talk to you soon. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other.